Now we go further afield in the United States, where President-elect Donald Trump has appointed billionaire Elon Musk to lead his new Department of Government Efficiency. Musk will be tasked with doing away with government bureaucracy, excessive regulations and wasteful expenditure. Now, Trump has also been vocal in criticizing the United Nations. He calls it just a club for people to get together, to talk and have a good time. Now, during his previous tenure, he cut some of the funding to the United Nations. Now, we discuss this and more with Dr. Kingsley Makhubela. He is an international relations expert. Dr. Makhubela, thank you so much for your time this morning. How do we describe this department that Donald Trump seems to have invented, for lack of a better word, government efficiency? It seems to be self-explanatory, but what's your understanding of it, particularly in the context of the United States?
Good morning, Audrey. You know, any leader should be concerned about the state of affairs in the United States. It is estimated now, Audrey, that between $233 and $521 billion it's lost to fraud within the federal government. The federal government has collected less taxes. Last year, I think they collected about $4.5 trillion, and the government has spent about $6.2 trillion. And the national debt is running at $33.2 trillion. So given the state of affairs, there's a need to relook at the system and to really overhaul the system. What Donald Trump has announced is essentially what we're talking about here at home, the reform of the public service, because he needs to look into streamlining federal agencies, which are government departments. So he's quite concerned about how the resources are spent. Logically, he needed to take some action. I really don't know if creating a department would be worth it, because he still needs to get to convince the Senate and the House about the existence of such department. And it goes against the ethos of the Republican for a smaller, trimmed government. Now, creating a bigger government bureaucracy would raise serious concern even within his allies. He may want later on maybe to reconsider putting this within the White House, have an agency that looks into this wasteful expenditure and streamlining the bureaucracy within the government system, because he realized that the bureaucracy has stifled the smooth running of the government.
So what I hear from you is to say there is a need for this government efficiency when you speak of these huge numbers and wasteful expenditure that he's been complaining about. But the fact that it's not an official government department and that will need a permission from Congress to be able to have some kind of powers to implement all these huge ideas, I suppose remains to be seen. Donald Trump has never been a conventional leader, and I suppose is not about to start now. But just looking at these two business people, Trump and Elon Musk, do you think that perhaps that is what he's trying to tap into when it comes to that kind of a skill set to be able to head that department?
Well, you know, he may be banking in terms of getting approval for the establishment of the new department. He may be banking on the fact that both houses now are in the hands of the Republican. They are likely to support his agenda. But really creating a bureaucracy would create a huge problem for him. I think it's the biggest hurdle. He doesn't need to create enemies at the stage within the House. He needs to keep his allies together. I think that's where the issue is. But because he's a businessman, if you look at what he's suggesting, is that this new department must also consult with the private sector and get advices from the private sector on how to run the government. Now, the United States has always prided itself with running an efficient government. It's unlikely to succeed. And of course, he's then speaking about reforming federal agencies and streamlining their performance and firing what he thinks are dead woods within the federal system. You'll recall, Audrey, that previously when he was running for presidency, he ran on a famous phrase that says, cleaning the swamp, you know, something like that. And he's likely to keep on saying that he needs to really take the deadwood out of the federal government to make it much more efficient. As to whether a business person like Elon Musk and Ramaswamy would understand how the government is, because how to run a government and how to run a bureaucracy are totally different. They're going to realize as soon as they get into office to say some of these challenges are unlikely to be met without going through the bureaucratic procedures.
So some of us in Africa obviously have been wondering how his foreign policy, of course, we've experienced his presidency before, and how he interacts with African countries and his policies regarding that. But we see that he's a very inward-looking president who really is more concerned about putting Americans first. But looking at the United Nations, which I think is one of the biggest worries when it comes to funding, should we be worried about how that is likely to be reformed if not as much funding is given to that international organization?
You know, the United States remains the biggest funder of the United Nations. I think they contribute in rands terms the total of about 324 billion rands. That's what they contribute. And this contribution is taken across different agencies within the United Nations. They provide to the regular budget, which is the budget to daily run the United Nations, about $711 million. Now, and they get regularly assessed on different agencies. For instance, if there's a peacekeeping mission, they would approve it at the Security Council, and later on they send the bill back. The bill may range close to $2 billion. For now, the highest has been close to $3 billion that the United States keeps on providing funding. Of course, if you provide this amount of funding to any entity or three, you ought to be very concerned about the spending of every cent that is given to the institution. I think Donald Trump is going to bring some of these concerns, but some of the issues are going to fall on countries like us, where we've depended on the US aid in terms of the combating of HIV/AIDS and so on, because the US aid has been providing a lot of funding, not only to South Africa, even to other countries around the world. I think they're going to look inward, as you're correctly saying, to say, can't we better spend this money to deal with some of the ills that we're seeing, the high increase of drug abuse within the US and so on, and the collapsing health system within the United States.
And that's a huge concern, especially here in Africa. I'm sorry to cut you off there, Dr. Kingsley Makhubela. We've run out of time, so much to talk about. I know we're going to have you once again to continue some of these very important conversations, particularly how it affects us here in Africa.